China's annual Two Sessions is underway. Reporters from CGTN, China Radio International and Chinese newspaper Global Times shared some stories on covering this year's political gathering.
Hello and welcome to CGTN Roundtable Talk. Two sessions in the eyes of the media. I'm glad to be joined here by my colleague Mike Walter from DC and Wang Wenwen from Global Times and Mr. Luo Laiming from China Radio International. So great to have you all here in the studio. And the government work report, the creme de la creme of all the reports. So everybody has read this report from the whole day long. And tons of numbers and figures and statistics. And how it's related to every people's life. Let's break it down into different areas. How about Mike? Which number impressed you most?
Well, a couple numbers. The rural poor population decreasing by 13.86 million. And then also the target of reducing it a further 10 million in rural poor population. And what's interesting about that to me, of course, is these advances for China and how much they've done on this stage. You know, I just interviewed an author who talked about ending the debt trap in China. And what's interesting is when I was researching it, I'd looked at the U.S. and Lyndon Baines Johnson back in the 60s had the Great Society. He was going to lift all these people out of poverty. And Ronald Reagan poked fun at him years later when he ran for president. He said, you know, the U.S. declared war on poverty and poverty won. But I think what he's illustrating is just how difficult it is, and yet China's been able to do it, and they've been doing it in a remarkable way. It gets more and more difficult as you go down the road, but it's not this blanket policy. They go in, it's very targeted and specific, e-commerce, lots of innovative ways, and it's been very interesting to watch.
I agree with you, Mike. If you go into the rural areas in China, you notice there are great changes taking place. Lifting people out of poverty is huge down in the countryside, because in the 19th Party Congress report, we have this revitalizing the countryside as a major national strategy. So how about Wenwen? Which number impressed you most in the government work report?
I had to say the number I focus on is not impressive because it's within expectation. Like I focus on the defense budget and the GDP growth, and the defense budget is 7.5%, which is lower than the last year of 8.1%. As for the GDP growth, the government now sets the range between 6 and 6.5, which is also within the expectation of the Chinese people as well as the world.
The economic growth rate and defense budget that concerns you most. And how about you, Laiming?
My most impressive figure from this year's work report would be the 20% cut based on the data plan cost. I mean, last year when Premier Li Keqiang said they were going to introduce a cut on the cost of data plan or also broadband.
Broadband and mobile phone, right?
I was reading it, actually, mobile data plan. I was reading it, and then by the end of last year, I actually took a trip to one of the Unicom offices, and I got a data plan for less money and actually 10 times more data. Before that, I was paying 56 yuan for 500 megabytes of data, and then after that trip, I was given a deal. I only have to pay 39 yuan every month, and I get 5 gigabytes of data. So, yeah, less money for 10 times the data.
I may sign up for his plan. I'm nowhere in that ballpark.
Remember in the press conference, you're almost running out of money in your mobile phone.
Exactly.
And also, Mike, tell us about how the U.S. media see the two sessions, China's political season. Is it dominating some of the headlines? I mean, the important meetings.
You know, it's funny because I think you and I were talking about this the other day. The U.S. is just fixated on that one number, the GDP, and that tends to get all the headlines. And then I don't think really there's a clear understanding of how this works. And rather than dive in and try and understand it, they just say it's a rubber stamp for the
government. All the time.
And that's an easy way to dismiss it. I think it's also lazy journalism, and that's what you see a lot in the Western press.
I covered the two sessions back in 2010, and at that time I found there were not many foreign journalists reporting on that, and I was surrounded by a group of African journalists at that time. But I think these years there are more and more Western journalists reporting on that and are more interested in it than Chinese journalists.
I think there are many sensitive questions raised during the press conferences, like the Belt and Road debt trap and China-U.S. relations and national defense budget. Those are very sensitive questions the spokesperson is not avoiding right now.
No.
Actually,
and even today, I would say that there was no avoidance talking about, was it a lot about the risks that are out there, but Li Keqiang saying, you know, turning risks into opportunities. You know, I don't think they're shying away from some of the issues that are out there.
And risks actually stressed many times.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, that's all for today's CGTN Roundtable Talk. We'll bring you more discussions on the 2 sessions in the eyes of the media.